Hello.
Wonderful. Now that I'm here, finally, so it will be great. We can actually get started. So, I'm not sure what you guys have covered so far, but let's just start from the top. So this is a panel on...
I just dropped a lot of knowledge, just like right now, so.
I hope they recorded it because I didn't need that later. The panel is on interoperability for NFTs. And I'm sure these guys have introduced themselves, but let me formally introduce myself and then we'll get to both of them and then we'll get to some nitty-gritty of the knowledge that Todd's been dropping. So my name is Roop Singh, as most of you know. And I view this space from a technology standpoint, particularly a blockchain standpoint. That's been my background. And I also view the space from a business, strategy, markets, and society standpoint. I am, however, not a wonderful creative artist like a lot of you here. Neither am I somebody who would describe as a native king. So you'll see those perspectives here now. Now I do teach executives about blockchain strategy, and NFTs are something that come up quite often. It's been crazy last year or so. I've had a lot of discussions and a lot of point of views from creators to musicians to graphical artists to VCs and even corporate executives. So this is something that a lot of people are struggling to understand in a way, and a lot of people are excited about as well. So having said that, let's get to Todd. I'm not sure if you give a formal introduction, but I would love for you to just share some of your background. And I know you have very strong views on this topic, let's put it that way. Being interoperability for NFTs, is it even possible or is it just a pipe dream? So after your background, just share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, so I shared, and and again, I'm here to learn and evolve like everybody else. My main point is that I don't believe, while NFTs provide a valuable additional level of functionality, they don't address most of the hard problems related to interoperability. When it comes to technical, they do nothing to add to the fact that most game engines today don't even agree with whether X and Y mean up or horizontal. Like we're that far apart from each other, let alone the architecture of the human and how many pieces are segmented, because you want a digital experience where you can change your face versus not, because you want faster rendering time. NFTs do nothing to make the technical compatibility easier. As I said in my article, I can own the battery within my leaf. That doesn't mean it works in a Tesla. Ownership has zero to do with interoperability, and NFTs primarily are addressing ownership. Beyond that, the technical problems can be solved. They're just generally not worth solving because in many cases they detract more than they add. And again, I could talk a little bit about that, but I'll let you respond.
Ernesto, share your background and also your views on this problem.
Yeah, so in terms of the NFTs that we were talking earlier, I'm also skeptical that it's going to come and make interoperability happen just because you can prove ownership. That being said, I will mention one thing that has to do with a little bit of the legal aspects of interoperability and the financial or economic incentives. Because, and I'm not a proponent of this, I'm just going to be creative in terms of how we could potentially help. But because things are ownership and movement can be tracked, that can provide an incentive for example, companies like Disney creating their own NFTs and then monetizing them based on how many places are you using, this NFT, how many metaverses, and be able to track through like the underlying technologies whether you can do that, without having to use NFTs or blockchain. Is a different discussion. But theoretically, this interoperability is only going to happen if there incentives, which I think is a very important point of why everybody is going to be keeping, the walled gardens for a long time. We won't see interoperability. However, if we start seeing creative ways for them to monetize, for an IP holder to monetize their intellectual property across multiple metaverses, I think there can be a potential use for, blockchain and NFTs.
Right. So you mentioned a keyword that NFT is, incentives, business models. So let's explore that a little bit further. Back in 2017, we started doing this research that said, why do blockchain companies and why do blockchain projects fail, and hence, why do they succeed? And one factor we've found consistent over the last so many years is adoption. Superior technology is not worth anything when we adopted technology is worth something. And adoption to me has largely to do with network effects. Something that is found in multiple of these communities, right? So the question I have, we're taking a different point of view from Todd, that is the world today. Yes, there are technical challenges, and there are maybe lack of incentives and motivation for publishers and developers to transfer their intellectual property or their assets onto another verse. The promise is that we must come out of these walled gardens. I mean, we have seen the way internet evolved over the last 30, 35 years. We've seen the effects and the walled gardens, network effects within those ecosystems. And we've seen where does the world bring us to, and that's fair, because that's where we are. But what about the future? The promise always has been that there will be an unwalled garden or a multiverse where things will be transferable and transported, and they will be persistent and consistent across multiverses. So to me, if we are not building towards that, then we're just losing the plot. We're going to stay where we are. And to his point, what are the incentives? The incentives for publishers, talking specifically in the gaming context, would be that their assets, which would be minted as NFTs, would be more valuable to the players within the ecosystem because they could be perhaps sold, traded, or used in a different ecosystem. And that would give them an inherently more powerful network effect and hence more value. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think fundamentally when you work back from user experience, which we all, I would say, should be doing, you can call it a walled garden or you can call it a cultivated experience. And again, I think when you take it out of the world of technology and into regular life, it becomes very clear. The game of football is not made better by saying you can import a basketball and play with that. The game of football has a cohesive visual aesthetic and set of mechanics, meaning rules, which make it function. And there's a deliberate change over time that might take user feedback. Interoperability does not make the game of football better. Interoperability would not make the movie Lord of the Rings better. Taking an asset from Harry Potter and sticking it in the middle of Lord of the Rings is not a better user experience. Interoperability would not make a Beatles song better by importing a stanza from somewhere else. That broad interoperability is a mishmash. It is not a user experience that would be desirable, even though we can do all those things technically today. And so why, for some reason, we think that in a 3D virtual environment, we want something that we don't actually want is a confusing proposition. I can acknowledge that there might be certainly a social chat function where I want to present myself, and if that had some degree of carryover from other things I did online, that could be a desirable thing. That's, in my view, a tiny sliver of where the overall attention is going to be spent in the metaverse, no matter how you define it. If you define it as a point in time, a particular product, or just a series of cultural trends, We're going to spend more and more time in an online world where they care about an online persona. We're going to have multiple online personas if we're fortunate.
Right. So let me just quickly noodle on something you mentioned, just to clarify. So you were talking about aesthetics and designability and even interface in a particular context, in a particular ambiance, if you will. And that's understandable. I don't think we need to define what we mean by interoperability. When I talk about interoperability, it doesn't mean that you can use a certain asset from one game that does not at all transport its aesthetics and context to another game. And that's fair. That's fair from a game narrative standpoint, that's fair from a user experience standpoint. I don't think that is the level of interoperability we're talking about. I think it goes within a context. So perhaps, to me, interoperability is not binary. It's not 0 or 1. It's like, oh, if I can take this from somewhere else, everywhere else, then I win. Perhaps there are certain localized contexts or ecosystems that we build that are in the same narrative, if you will, and they share assets. And here's another context. Maybe this asset becomes so valuable and we have an external marketplace that actually has nothing to do with the game itself. It's an exchange, a crypto exchange or stock exchange, where you sell 10,000 of these assets for a particular value. And that brings in a lot of the incentive in the business model back into the developer's mind and into the publisher's mind. Ernesto.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight something that Todd said. While it is a technical challenge, the reason for having non-interoperability is not a technical problem. Like if people wanted to do it, it will get done. It will take a lot of time at the beginning, but it can be done. So the technical part, while many people may perceive that as the main challenge, I think it's the least important challenge. The main challenge for interoperability is the financial incentives, is the design questions of like what the user wants, more than the technical part.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that the technical challenges can be solved, because to me, again, this is rooted in current state. And the phrase I love is creative destruction. Current state is not the future state. The future state will be different. Now, what will that be is up to us as a community to design and create. So, moving forward, if we believe that things can change, and if we find the motivations and drivers and economic business models to change, how would that look like? What would that world potentially look like? So, two things come to mind. And I'll lay those frames out, and I want you to react to that. One is the idea of open standards, formats, things of that nature within a context. Right? And there could be, 20 open standards, I don't get it, but the point is that they are something that developers can develop too, publishers can develop too, and then we have at least a little bit seamless transportation, portation from one universe or one ecosystem to another. The second aspect that I'm thinking of is publisher-based ecosystems. So within the same idea, that the publishers, they have multiple blockchain-based games already, and now it's being very specific that these are blockchain-based games and not other games, where they have developed a kind of a composable ecosystem. It's almost like an open-ended platform with standards and libraries that artists and creatives can choose to design on. And they take these little pieces and then they develop their own art. And some of them get to more notoriety, more adoption than others. But it's within maybe they have 5 games within that composable micro ecosystem, if you will, and they all relates to each other somehow. It's like taking a character from a Marvel movie to some other universe. So, how did these thoughts hit you in terms of how we could design these things for the future?
So in terms of open standards, I think, like we said, it's within technical feasibility. It's just a motivation and resource question, and it could be accomplished. And I do believe that within a single publisher, because incentives are aligned, there will be experiences. I know people that are working on that right now to be able to use an item or within one game, let's say in the sequel to that game. And the primary reason that that works is because it is common IP. As you mentioned, Marvel, it's like a crossover. Most of the value in my mind of these digital goods, it's specific to a community. The reason when people talk about projects and launching projects and how the community is so important, you know, the most highly valuable earned item in the video game I made, Smite, is so meaningful to that community and so meaningless outside of that context. You quickly, so to me, all of the value is the fact that it's a bounded community that cares about it, and you destroy value in many cases when you leave that community and you take it into another context. So yes, it's technically possible. Yes, within the same IP, you will definitely see crossover. Within the same publisher, you will also see some crossover. By the way, we have all of that today. NFTs technically make this no easier. NFTs do reflect a cultural trend of increasingly consumers wanting to have more ownership of digital items. So that's the signal that publishers are picking up on and figuring out where it makes sense. But again, the fact that you might take it from one publisher world into another is very misaligned business objectives. In the same way, as I kind of said in the article, I'm earning my points every time I order Papa John's. And I have a lot of value in those points, and I'm going to use them at Papa John's. It's not a technical reason why Domino's does not let me use my points over there. That is a very easy technical situation. It's just as easy for Epic and Riot to cooperate today, having nothing to do with NFTs. They know what item you own, they can tell me. It's super easy. That's not the reason they're not doing it.
Yeah. I wanted to highlight something else that I don't think many people touch on in general about interoperability, which is not just assets and not even like the identity as an avatar, but also some other information about you. So and this can be like positive information as well as negative information about you. So I'm originally from Chile, and I went back to live in Chile during the pandemic, and I had a really hard time with banks wanting to give me a loan to buy a house or buy a car or anything, because I have been living in the US for like 14 years, and my salary is coming from here, and I have nothing over there. So the kind of the transferability of my credit worthiness would have been very nice, kind of from the US to there. And I think over time, I think Elizabeth said this in one of her workshops, is that, you know, metaverses will function like countries. And there's a lot of elements that may be beneficial to transfer from country to country. Some of them you don't. Maybe your personality, like you say, you want to have a different avatar, a different persona in each of them. But maybe your skill level as a player is something that you want to transfer across different platforms. Or I can't remember where I read this, but also if, you know, there could be a way of sharing across platforms who are the trolls, you know, and just kick them out and increase, like, sure, they can create a new account, but then we are increasing the friction for them as bad actors, and then decreasing friction for good actors to transfer like desirable behaviors. So I think there's potential for non-mechanics and non-visual or non-assets conversations for NFTs and interoperability that often are, you know, not talked about.
But yeah, that's a very interesting metaphor to use in other countries. So transference or rotation, ability to utilize what you had in one universe into the other would be really useful. Coming back to what you said, I would question this aspect of what is in one realm is not valuable in the other, for the only reason that we haven't actually done it yet. There are some games that I read about, recently came across Axie Infinity that is attempting to do that. So I think it is an idea that has not been fully explored yet, and the business practice So by the way, the pizza example that you mentioned, that is the same thing that's happening in the loyalty miles program. So we fly on airlines or we stay at hotels and we have lots of miles. And the challenge is that miles don't have liquidity outside of that realm, outside of the universe. Same thing with games. So what's happening now is a company out of Atlanta, Backed, which is leading this effort, but there are plenty of other use cases, where they're looking at creating an open marketplace for points. You can sell yourself as points in Delta versus Delta points, and it would operate just like a foreign currency or even a crypto exchange. Right? So I do, maybe this is a radical idea, but I do see a world where there are a lot of games and a lot of users that are very dedicated and passionate about each realm. But then there is a marketplace that's kind of agnostic that says, okay, 100 of these skins in Fortnite are worth another 100 in another game, or another 500. Maybe that's the exchange rate that's been set. I think that's the world we will possibly live in.
Yeah, I mean, 100% there already are marketplaces where in-game items implemented as NFTs can be traded with others. That exists today, that will continue to grow. It's a little different than interoperability, but I take your point, that definitely exists, and it's a higher form of ownership than existed before. Again, because I know we're coming on time, really my main point for anyone pursuing this vision of more interoperability than we have today, I'll just leave it at that, is to not think that the technology is doing any heavy lifting for you. It's not. It is signaling that players want ownership, and it is, yes, there's a distributed database form of doing that, but that's not the hard part. This experiment around interacting from game universes to real world economies has been going on for decades, and you can learn from what has been done before. You can look at the example of Diablo, a famous video game where you grinded and you would earn valuable items, and they experimented with putting a real money auction house into that game, and how that totally destroyed the game economy. And that was just one game by the developer implementing it themselves in a fairly closed system. And I can tell you many of those stories over and over again, because the hard problems are human social cooperation problems and a bit of economics modeling. It's not a technology problem, and they've been attempted with text, 2D, 3D, and whether it's VR or not, the presentation is not the hard part. It's some of the social things, and I'm just encouraging people to look at that and learn from it before thinking that NFTs are somehow going to help with interoperability between 3D spaces.
Directly, just to kind of wrap it up, I think it all comes down to the user experience, and for the Metaverse to grow as people are thinking that it's going to grow. At least our philosophy is that there's a lot of friction still. Like, most people don't care about NFTs, most people don't care about blockchain, and if you start thinking about those terms, it's going to be less likely for them to join these ecosystems. So I think the technology has to be there as a function to improve the user experience as a whole. And for us, it's about reducing the friction.
So on that note, I'll say that I can agree with you on one thing, that technology is not the issue in solving the social cooperation and social coordination business model challenges. I will take umbrage with the fact that most people don't care about NFTs and most people don't care about blockchain. That's a matter of which people you speak to, and it's a matter of which year are we in. It's the 13th year since Bitcoin, and you can tell which way the trend is and which way the markets are. So that is also a matter of adoption. It's a matter of awareness and learning. When NFTs solve a particular problem of ownership and tradability and liquidity, and being able to utilize your asset for higher value, I think that's when people will start caring about it. Right? Till somebody takes the leap and makes that happen, then we'll always have this experimental question, do we or don't we? And I think in terms of our society value proposition, to me, if you're just going to live in this current state, then why bother with this new stuff? There is no disruption or creative destruction that's happening if you don't think about the future state. So to me, the world that we will eventually live in, we should have and we will have digital reputation, digital prestige, your digital style and aesthetic, at least being transferable from realm to realm and be tradable for a certain value in another asset class. So on that note, we'll close it.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So I think that's great, and I love the fact that you all into it. It's a social, human problem, and that's so, like we were talking in Emory with their art collector, group, and now is the time we need humanitarians, we need sociologists, we need philosophers, because the technology is there. That's definitely not the issue, it's the incentive. But I did want to talk about technology for one quick second. I know some people who are doing some really interesting things where with the NFT comes like a tiny machine that does the exchange itself. So, like with music, I've seen that, where it's like if it goes to this place, it changes the music to play with that and has a smart contract built into it. So I agree that not every single thing that we do needs to be interoperable, but maybe our avatars aren't close.
Something very, very fun maybe to think about. This is something that we were starting to play with as a proof of concept is keep talking about the aesthetics. It's like also if your character would change, it's the same persona, it would change to be like a low-poly character, to like a never squishy character, or high fidelity, depending on the ecosystem or in the place that it is. So automatically change, which is something that you could potentially kind of program, using the technology, the built-in machine, essentially. Yeah, it's fun.
So, hopefully all we did was just sort of blow your minds up. Just to go back to where we started, we're at an inflection point in the world right now, because of war and countries trying to figure out how to collaborate and communicate. But the same thing is applied to how we move into these metaverses, because they are like countries themselves too. So these talks about DAOs and talks about interoperability, it's not just like, what are you gonna do for your job? It's really like, what do you value? And, so carrying on these conversations while maybe having a glass of wine with the rest of us, for a little while, and just keeping this going. We will continue that tonight. Then tomorrow there's a party here with live performances, 7 to 10, and then another one that goes like 10 to 4 in the morning. I probably won't be at that one. But, and then there's another party Saturday night. And just to reiterate what Chris said, this is now going to be a permanent NFT gallery for Atlanta, and they're going to continue with new content. So all you artists get creating, all you philosophers start philosophizing about how we can, build beautiful new worlds that, make our lives, our real lives, and our virtual lives better. And let's all go to the bar. All right, thank you.